Hi, I'm Dr. J. Varma, and welcome to Thermometer. On this channel, I check the temperature of health in the United States and around the world and give you expert insights on infectious diseases and public health. I'm pleased to welcome my friend and colleague, Dr. Jon Epstein, for a weekly episode called Inside Bird Flu, where we discuss the latest news about the H5N1 epidemic here in the US and around the world. Thanks for joining me today, Jon.
Thanks, Jay. How are you doing this week?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it's good. It's good for us to stay on top of this news because even though things have been relatively quiet, I think about bird flu, which is a good thing. We know the way all diseases are, right? They can suddenly evolve or jump or something change that can surprise us in ways that we don't want to be surprised.
Yeah, it's a tricky topic because I don't know if people out there caught the 60 Minutes segment. It might have been 2 weeks ago now about avian influenza on dairy cattle farms, and they were interviewing veterinarians who've been working on this. We're really at risk by not paying attention to this, and it is hard to sound the alarm every single day and every single week because people just get tired of hearing it and they switch off, they tune out. But unfortunately, this is something that is happening in the background that we're not adequately dealing with. And you're right, all of a sudden there's going to be a problem that's overwhelming, and we're already seeing the process happening. It's like watching the train wreck. And so it's worth talking about, it's worth staying on top of, and contextualizing things so that people understand what's going on.
No, it's great to see things like 60 Minutes. I sometimes forget because I'm so deeply enmeshed in this world that a lot of people aren't thinking about this issue. And so it is great to see a new perspective from a reputable news show trying to raise awareness among people who may not be thinking about it because there's obviously a lot of other important urgent issues in their lives to worry about.
Yeah.
So we discussed 2 weeks ago about outbreaks of bird flu in live animal markets in New York City. It appears there may not be much being done actually to stop further outbreaks. There was a video footage obtained by BBC Science Focus that reveals that the inner city poultry markets in New York may be failing to take recommended precautions to protect their staff and the public. And this is, of course, within the context of seeing more animal infections across New York State. And so, these undercover reporters and activists took some footage showing the staff at several locations in Queens handling birds without using any basic recommended personal protective equipment, such as masks. And, I'll show for our viewers right now kind of, one of the pictures that that was put on the screen here. Let's see here, show this picture here. There we go. And basically, it's just a picture showing people walking around without basically wearing any PPE whatsoever. Although the facility itself looks, relatively clean. But so, Jon, give me your feedback on this investigation and what you're seeing in this picture and the concerns being raised here.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to say is we want to be careful not to paint too broad a brush here. We don't know that none of the markets are taking precautions or that they haven't started to clean things up. It is a process. But I think the takeaway from this article is that maybe things aren't happening quickly enough, and maybe there isn't as much enforcement or assertion of policy recommendations than we'd like to see, because live poultry markets are particularly, important interface or important place where influenza can be introduced, where the public has contact with poultry, and it's often under the radar of public health monitoring. And so this is something we do need to stay vigilant about, and hopefully the state health agencies in New York, both veterinary and public health, will stay on top of this and continue to track it and work with the communities where these markets exist to do as good a job as they can at both keeping it disinfected as best as they can, and also making sure that the workers are protecting themselves from exposure to influenza virus.
Yeah, the official guidance from New York State is to discourage unnecessary visitors, use biosecurity signs to warn people not to enter buildings without permission, to require visitors to cover and disinfect their footwear because we know viruses can be transmitted that way, screening visitors for any recent contact with birds, and reporting anything unusual, especially sick or dead birds, to the department. What do you think about it? Is that guidance sufficient? Is it actually practical to implement at a live poultry market?
Well, let's think about this. When we go to the supermarket, Jay, we're never worried about our safety or our health. We're going in there, we're buying our food, packaged food, even the butcher, the meat's already cut, it's laid out so nicely, they wrap it up in paper, we take it, we go away, and we're not thinking twice about it. Hopefully, if we're buying raw poultry, we're thinking about washing our hands after handling it and that sort of thing. But this is different. And in communities that rely on live animal markets for their protein, they go there to get their meat. They are, unlike us, they are coming into contact potentially with living animals. And if those animals happen to be infected with influenza virus, there's a possibility that people can get exposed to it. So it is a different type of environment than most of us are accustomed to. And the other thing I want to mention, which is really has to do with one of the great challenges of public health. I lived in Queens for 16 years, and I was there for the first half of the COVID pandemic, and I was working directly with communities to try to convey messages about how to protect themselves, what to do if family members get infected, and so forth. And there was so much confusion. A lot of times when you're dealing with communities that are international cultures, people who maybe English isn't their first language, maybe there's a tight cultural community, there is often a difficulty with communication with government public health services. There sometimes is mistrust of government services, and you tend to have these kind of tight insular communities that rely on information from trusted leaders within the community, family members, friends, religious leaders. I bring this up because sometimes just because a policy is put out by a public health department doesn't mean that communities will take it on board immediately for various reasons. And these are some of them. And so in my experience, it requires so much trust building, direct work, communication and interaction with people within the community. And these live bird markets often are present in immigrant communities, where some of that may be true, where sometimes the communication isn't perfect between public health agencies. So that could account for some of the lack of compliance, slow compliance, or frankly just disinterest in complying.
Yeah, and it looks like some of the people that are trying to get stricter standards put in place are veterinarians and animal rights activists who are the ones doing this kind of citizen sleuthing and going in and taking these videos. One person is a veterinarian named Dr. Crystal Health, I think is her name, Heath actually, seems to have been the one who took these videos. And BBC quoted her as saying, these live poultry markets are failing to take the most basic biosecurity precautions, and it's officials' negligence that allows these places to continue to threaten public health. So that's what this activist veterinarian, Dr. Crystal Heath, said. Do you think it's a good strategy for veterinarians, animal rights activists to be monitoring what's going on by doing these sort of hidden camera operations?
I think vilifying and blaming and shaming is never the right approach in a community if you want behavior change. I think sometimes with government, you have to call out, lack of activity or action in order to get them to pay attention. Sometimes you have to bang the drum, and there, certainly are instances where, community activism gets government to pay more attention. So here's a case where, it'd be great for state agencies and authorities to do more intensive work with these markets to get them to a place where there's more safety. I don't think, calling out and vilifying the markets themselves is a good strategy to improve compliance. In fact, sometimes it risks causing more secrecy, more, of them being suspicious of the public, and it breaks down those barriers to, it creates barriers to communication.
Well, it's interesting because that actually leads us into the next topic that I wanted to discuss, which is how do you incentivize people to trust government and our healthcare system better when it comes to emerging diseases like bird flu. And the CDC, it turns out, is now working with the state of California on a project that's offering gift cards to encourage people to get tested or vaccinated if they live near a farm that has, that's been reported to have bird flu. Some clinicians in the state are giving $25 gift cards to people in those communities near these farms, so that they can get swabbed for a potential bird flu infection, or to get vaccinated using right now the regular seasonal influenza vaccine. And so this is part of a program that they're doing. There's also a testing van that's been created to offer testing at this site. So this is one way in which government can work on one of the things you just talked about, which is how do you strengthen safety and also encourage people to want to work together with government and do essentially the right thing.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. You want to remove every barrier possible to people getting health checks and taking health precautions and safety measures. And you got to be careful with how you incentivize that, because, the opposite side of that is accusations of coercion, right? You're offering some kind of cash or gift incentive to get people to do something which might be in the interest of public health, but at an individual level, it's just something, I think we have to be careful about. But what I do think is communication and showing benefit and providing other health services as an incentive for people to come also, learn about the risks of flu and get the vaccine is important. So, I hope it works, but I also am cautious about that approach because I think it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, we ended up in a situation like during COVID here in New York City where I'm a bit pessimistic about incentives for that reason. And to me, it's not so much about the issue of coercion. It's about wanting people to do the right thing because they trust that it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And there's something about saying, well, if it was the right thing to do, why are they paying me to do it? Like, if the vaccine is so safe, why are they paying me to get it? So it's weird. So in a way, I do think that I do have some concerns sometimes. And it's very hard to know because you need to know your community well. People, every community is a diverse group itself, but you need to understand what their perspectives are. In some places, this type of incentive is good because it allows people to afford things like, gas or a little time off from work to do something. But in the other time, it can also reinforce their suspicion that government is paying me because they know I wouldn't do this normally.
Yeah, I fully agree. One thing I would like to see is, now we're seeing it's more and more common to have these like dual tests, these rapid tests, like with COVID, but they add influenza A to the test. And they're available now at pharmacies. And it'd be great to see these rapid tests widely available on dairy farms so that workers could get a nose swab and be tested on site. And that is a great way to screen for influenza A infection. These should pick up H5N1 infections, although they're not specific to H5N1. But that could be at least a starting point to say, hey, we'd really love for you to get, see a doctor because, we see that you're infected with flu. And I don't think that's happening at this point, but that's something we could do to make it really easy to test on farms.
Yeah, without question. And this is unfortunately one of the many things that's happened in this current administration is that during the previous administration, they had been really, procuring large amounts of COVID tests and pushing them out to communities, and you could order free tests. I ordered them several times to the post office.
Me too.
And as an infectious disease person, I would love for our federal government to be investing, particularly during respiratory virus season, not just for bird flu, but respiratory virus season, to basically subsidizing these tests because they are in the interest of everybody.
Yep.
They're in interest, economic interest as well too. Like when people are sick and knowing what they have can help you lead to treatment and help them come back to work faster. Having this type of testing can also lead people to avoid infecting other people, which also keeps her. So I always bring the economic argument in there because that's the one that always seems to be, I care about this because I care about human health and people's welfare. But it's also important to always make the point that actually public health measures like this, they help the economy. It's not a choice between health and the economy. They can do both.
Yeah. And I always think, it is so empowering to have an at-home diagnostic test. One of the big barriers always is, I'm feeling crummy. I don't know what it is. I'm just going to assume it's flu because flu-like symptoms, it's an expression for a reason, right? It might be what I have. But to be able to know for sure that it is or isn't flu is really helpful. And if I don't have to go into a doctor's appointment and miss a day of work and all these things, but I can wake up in the morning and test myself. And if I do have flu, then I know, hey, maybe I'm going to stay home today to, have some rest. I could wear a mask, but at least there's really empowering knowledge you can get right there at home. And I think that's an amazing advance that we have. And a lot of that happened because of COVID.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've always been a huge fan of democratizing diagnostic testing, making it more widely available. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Jon, and thank you to the viewers out there for watching this week's episode of Inside Bird Flu. If you're enjoying our discussions about infectious diseases and public health, please hit the like button. Please share this with people. Please subscribe. And we'll see you again next week for another episode of Inside Bird Flu.
Be well.